What is something illegal you have done and got away without getting caught? I brought 2 or 3 Cuban cigars back to the US from Montreal once. When we cleared the border, I turned to my parents and used my favorite line from Futurama. Guess what your accessories to? It was 2004. I am well aware this is no longer illegal. I stole my own car from the tow impound lot. Best part was getting the certified letter months later that they were going to auction it if I didn't come and pay for it. You should have gone back with the letter and demanded to see the car.
My friends and I didn't pay for our dinner at Steak and Shake this past weekend. I stood waiting at the register trying to pay for 20 minutes, but no one came to take my money. It was 12:30 a.m. before we left. This might come as a surprise to people who've never worked at restaurants before, but it happens really often. At this restaurant I used to work at, I've had people walk away, only to come back the next day, apologize and pay and give the same reasoning you did. Not sure how it works where you're from, but a lot of restaurants here in Amsterdam will charge the waiter or whoever was responsible for watching your table. Stole a Blue Angels flag from the hangar they were parked in. When I was in the Navy, the Blue Angels visited the airbase I was stationed at. They proceeded to kick all of our planes out of our hangar and I had to fix our birds out in the rain. In a fit of contempt, on the last day they were there, I went into the mezz and stole the flag hanging from the overhead beams. I still have the flag and wear it like a cape from time to time. Assisted in semi-stealing a car. Almost 2 decades ago my cousin calls my dad and says his car broke down. As my dad has friends with heavy equipment, he figured my dad could get a trailer to tow it on. So my dad, my uncle and I go pick up a flatbed tow truck from a friend of his, then drive 2 hours to pick up the car. We find it near where it should be on the side of the highway, so we load it up and go to a rest stop to secure it on the truck better. As my dad and my uncle are attaching straps, I'm looking at the car and notice something is odd. My cousin's car lit 80s Audi had broken speakers. For whatever reason they all stopped work, so instead of replacing them with normal speakers, he used house tower speakers, big ones at the back seat and passenger seat. I'm noticing there aren't any tower speakers in the car. I pointed this out and they stop and start looking at the car, then check the plate number. They don't match. Cousin had a vanity plate. My dad immediately hooks the call, raises the bed and lets it roll off into a space at the rest area. We hop into the truck and drive off to find the car. We find it less than a mile away. Audi reliability jokes aside, what are the odds of 2 identical Audis, same year, color and even rims and tires, being broken down that close to each other? I once kept a dead otter in my freezer after finding it on the side of the road. In the UK this can get a hefty fine and prison time without a license. Once I found out, I released the dead otter into the wild. It was a bit like Free Willy but with less movement. How do you apply for a dead otter owning license? Why was a teenager? My Labrador got out of the yard and I finally found him at the pound with a bullet in his shoulder. I had to put him down. I inadvertently found out who did it. I spray painted his Corvette. After he got it repainted, I did it again. Editing for clarity. This was a small town in the late 70s. I did tell the cops when he was shot, but we didn't know by who. They said they could do nothing. As far as I remember, even when I found out who did it, they said they couldn't help me. I found out who did it because my sister went to a party and a guy there was talking about a dog he shot. He lived in the same block where animal control picked my injured dog up. Of course I took my dog to the vet, but as a poor 16-year-old, I did not have the funds needed for surgery. If I recall correctly, it was $400, which would have been a small fortune for me. I had the vet put him down. He was a sweet lab. I bawled my eyes out for weeks. One of the local cops was a family friend. He put 2 and 2 together, and after the second paint job, he stopped by my work and mentioned what happened to this guy's car, and looked at me and said he hoped it wouldn't happen again. I took the hint and left him alone after that. This all happened over 40 years ago, but to the best of my recollection, that is what happened. I stole a police radio from a tabc officer once, drunk as hell and underage at a club. I was on the dance floor at some club and an elderly lady asked if I wanted to dance. I was like, fuck yeah, cougar action. She then asked me to follow her and I was like, fuck yeah, this lady fucks. She then showed me her badge and I was like, fuck. Officer took me to the back office of the club and threatened to take me to jail and decided on just giving me a fine. When she went to make a copy of my ID, she left her radio on the desk. I shoved that shit in my pants. I have no fucking clue why I did this. Went outside and called my friends and told them we have to leave. Got in the car and showed them what my drunk ass did and we all had a great laugh. Never paid the ticket and never received a warrant, so I guess I got away with it? I accidentally shoplifted some pudding cups once. I was at Target and was buying a couple of large bags of dog food which were in the basket part of the cart and several smaller items that were in the top part of the cart. I had tossed the pudding cups into the basket part before I put the dog food bags in and forgot they were there when I put all the smaller items on the belt to be rung up. They were hidden from view when the dog food bags were scanned. I saw them when I was putting the dog food bags into the trunk. If the lines weren't so long I would have gone back to pay for them, but 20 minutes for a 99-cent item, I can live with that. If it were a more expensive item I would have returned to pay for it. I trespassed a condo car park to see an expensive car. I pretended I lived there. I bet you took a picture of it too, you monster. I once overslept for an oral English exam. So I forged the letter I received with the date, and moved it to following week. Showed it to my English teacher and she said it was probably a mistake, but I had to show it to the school dean as well to get approval for a reschedule. I showed the forged letter to him and he instantly found a mistake I made in the letter and just casually said that the letter looked badly copied. I was sweating bullets at that point, because forging a letter for an exam is a pretty harsh offense and could have gotten me suspended. But he just shrugged it off and gave me permission for a reschedule. I guess since I wasn't a troublemaker he just gave me a pass. The dean was one of the cooler teachers at school though. He loved SpongeBob and if he gave you detention work, you had to make a SpongeBob figure with a sponge and such. Worked at a car dealership, broke many finance and insurance fraud laws on a daily basis for years. Most finance managers do and may not even be aware of it. I stole a piece of obsidian from biology class. At the next lesson biology teacher came to our classroom and forced us to admit who stole an obsidian. But I didn't. I visited an abandoned building. Someone called the police and 30 minutes later we saw firefighters walking into the huge building just to search us. Luckily we saw it when we were already out. Flown with weed in my checked luggage. This happened to me too. Went from Dallas to New York to London to Budapest before I found it. I think that makes me an international drug smuggler. I was visiting the beach, and when walking home with a friend from a bar at 4 a.m. on a Sunday night, we came across a jet ski on the beach being bounced around by the waves. My friend convinced me to ride it back with him the next mile to where we were staying. So we rode it in the ocean in pitch black while a storm was out and the distance cool, not scary. When we got to our place, we rode it around until the sun came up and then I found the jet ski registration, found a guy on Facebook, played the good guy and messaged him and told him hey I found your jet ski at X location on the beach, then went inside. It was a pretty thrilling experience. I don't know how illegal it was considering it was a jet ski just left in the ocean, and I returned it, but it was still pretty fun. I found out that this specific guy stole my phone, from checking previous text on my account and calling numbers they were in contact with. He wouldn't admit he stole it, so I broke into his house via balcony, stole his laptop, and left a singed note to meet me and return my phone to get his laptop back. It totally worked and everyone got their stuff back. When I was high school, my mom and I went to Walgreens to drop out my prescription for Vyvanse ADHD stimulant. For those who don't know, and the pharmacist, who knew I regularly got 60 pills for a 30-day supply, told my mom that the prescription indicated only 30 pills, not 60. She told my mom that in order to get the right number of pills, she would have to have my psychiatrist rewrite the prescription. Well, I was out of pills and had school the next day, so my mom was freaking out. She came back to the car with the prescription and explained that there was a line missing on a symbol used by the psychiatrist to indicate the number of pills per daily dose, and she was on the verge of a panic attack. I took the prescription sheet, observed the ink color and thickness, and asked my mom for a black pen. I carefully drew the extra line and told my mom to drive to the Rite Aid down the street, and I went in to turn in the prescription to get filled. I got my medication and we went home. I went into CVS for 3 things: deodorant, the specific pencils I like to use, and a notebook. I grabbed the deodorant, perused the office supply aisle and saw they didn't have the pencils I wanted, so I decided it wasn't worth it to get the notebook either. Feeling like my trip was a failure, I left. Walked out of CVS with the deodorant in my hand. No alarm went off, no employee stopped me. About 3 steps outside of the door, I realized I just stole, however unintentionally. So I walked back in, Bought the deodorant and 3 other items out of guilt. I was working at a little mom and pop pizza place that a friend of mine's parents owned. I was 20 at the time. And this was about the time that Zima came out. I was working in store that day. Not delivering. The owner gave me one to try. She came back later and asked if I had put a Jolly Rancher in it. Said it adds flavor. Came back later and told me to try a different Jolly Rancher. Fast forward to me getting off work and driving home. I was changing CDs and dropped it. I bent down to pick up the CD and in doing so, pulled the steering wheel and ended up pull slightly out of the lane. I immediately corrected and got back in my lane. Then I saw the blue lights. I knew I hadn't been speeding, so I figured he saw me swerve. So I just pulled over to the side of the road. I was like, great, he is going to think I have been drinking. Then I was like, oh crap, I have. And I am only 20. So I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I waited until he got to the door, then dropped the car into gear and took off. Luckily I was right beside a turnaround, so I was already going the other way before he ever got back to his car. I drove down by a road near the lake, went over a couple streets and drove into a couple of switchbacks. Due to the back and forth nature of the roads, I could see his lights flashing in the distance. I pulled into a subdivision, parked in someone's driveway, turned off my lights and sat there. From where I was at, I could see him drive by a couple streets over with his lights on. I swear he could hear my heart beating in my chest even from there. I was praying that whoever's house I was at was not going to call the cops on me. I sat there for another 20 minutes, then left. And took the long way home. It took me about 20 minutes out of my normal route. I called me boss and told her what happened. And that I didn't feel comfortable coming into work the next day. She laughed and said okay. The couple days after that, I rode in with a buddy. Nothing ever came out of it.